From Joe Rogan criticizing his leg kicks, to Jackson telling viewers to mute their TV during fights. This is the time former UFC champ Quinton Rampage Jackson confronted Joe Rogan. Kicking us off, Quinton Rampage Jackson really hates when Joe criticizes fighters. In a recent podcast with Adam22 of No Jumper, Jackson put it out there that Joe just doesn't get why he doesn't check leg kicks in the UFC. Rampage replied they just really don't kick as hard, so he doesn't have to. Rampage would rather take the kick and deliver a punch. In other countries they do kick hard, so he does check them. Like the time he was in Japan. Quinton's fighting style doesn't incorporate many jiu-jitsu moves, and he doesn't use that as a source of strength. Only when he's pressed to use certain moves or defend against certain strikes does he do that.
Asking Yokoi to defend himself, and now Jackson going to town on Hirotaka Yokoi.
Nice shots here, nice work. Oh, watch out because that could end in a leg lock there, so he has to watch out there. But he's doing a phenomenal job.
Rampage says that's something Joe Rogan doesn't understand because of his extensive history with his own style.
No, he went for the triangle, and Rampage elevated, like he lifted him up, and the dude held onto the triangle, which you just can't do.
A simple open and shut case if you ask me. But hold up. We've been down this road before.
Since we hung out together when we did that Inside UFC thing, we hung out and all that, I like you, dude. I root for you. If I ever say anything about your game, it's only because I want you to get better.
Yeah, I like you too, you know what I'm saying? But it's just like, it's just the outcome of like, I got these new fans, these new UFC fans that don't know what the fuck they're talking about, and when I meet them, I'm tired of them.
Jackson previously said that when you win a fight in the UFC, you gotta go and do an interview with Joe. And when you do, he's just gonna tear you down the whole time. Rampage says, I'm like, here comes Joe Rogan, like he just picked apart your whole game like he's the best fighter in the world, and he knows every decision you decide to make.
He kind of biased sometimes, you know, against like jiu-jitsu guys. He loved jiu-jitsu guys, and sometimes I watch the fight, I turn it down a little bit, then I get a different, you know, some view of the fight.
Joe can be a bit much sometimes. As a podcaster, he can get a little long-winded.
On the way down, watch.
Let go right there.
Right. Bam!
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, he just got fucking KO'd.
But what about Joe? What's his opinion on what Jackson had to say? Rogan has gone on record saying he doesn't make that kind of commentary out of malice. He only wants viewers to better understand what fighters are doing, and more importantly, what they can be doing better.
Having a good fucking time, though. That was before anybody knew who Rampage was.
I misunderstood him, because he was going by this, like, once again, like, 99, 2000. I had finished at UCLA, where I first like got my taste of jiu-jitsu was at UCLA, and then I graduated, and I went to Team Punishment, and I get on the mat, and Fabiano Iha was a coach there at the time. Fabiano Iha. Yeah.
One of the best arm bars in the
day.
Good
footlocks, dude.
Regarding Jackson, Rogan has stated that he has no ill will towards Quinton and that he thinks he's a great guy. But Joe has repeatedly said that he thinks Jackson might be being a little too sensitive. Rogan explains, I can't protect someone's feelings at the expense of what I'm supposed to be doing, which is sort of analyzing what's going on.
But you'll also realize that if they hadn't corrected it, you and your brain as a person who's just watching, you would have gone with this wrong narrative.
I thought they squashed this beef years ago. Makes me wonder why Rampage is bringing all of this up again. It'd be nice if they could just sit down and talk to each other on Joe's podcast. Millions tune in to the Joe Rogan podcast every airing, and it would be great to see them squash this live on air. Who knows if Joe will ever give the nod to Jackson to either come on the show, or if he already has and Quinton has declined. All we know is what Quinton reveals on the No Jumper podcast.
I watched some of his clips on TikTok or Instagram and stuff like that, and he has some pretty interesting guests on all the time.
Right.
He brought up other issues in the podcast as well, including UFC President Dana White. We were wondering when Rampage was going to get to the elephant in the room. Quinton said Dana zapped the love of the sport right out of him.
Yo, it didn't look like he slapped her back hard, though.
But he kind of like continued with it. Like he hit her one time and then he kind of...
I didn't...
He said when he lost his last UFC fight, they crafted a narrative that he was retiring. Crazy. After UFC, Jackson went to Bellator and his fans didn't even realize he had gone there. All because the UFC didn't grant him any press conferences at the end of the fight. The promotion simply left Rampage out in the cold. He would even have fans come up to him on the street and ask why he retired. When he had a match only 2 weeks ago, he also had some news when it came to fighting at Bellator. Rampage said he would no longer be doing any fights there. Wow. When pressed about the issue, Rampage said he was on the last fight of his contract and the last fight he did was a flop. Later on down the line though, he did express some interest in doing grudge matches. There's a couple of guys I owe some ass kicking to. Whoa. He was talking about Vanderlei Silva and his record with him being 2-2. Quinton suggested a tiebreaker using different rules such as boxing. Now that would be some quality entertainment right there. Another fighter Rampage expressed interest in was Marvin Eastman, with their records at 1-1. Later on, Quinton said the animosity that the fighters have for each other in the UFC is not for entertainment. That's something UFC audiences aren't used to seeing, which is more in line with fake WWE-esque boxing feuds. Quinton says 99% of the beefs he has are real. That explains why he still harbors resentment toward Rogan after all these years. Jackson's beef with Joe is clearly real, and other athletes have expressed their frustrations with the famous commentator as well. In an interview, Frank Mir once said that Joe is making excuses for certain fighters. And that isn't really the first time we've heard that. Former UFC interim lightweight champion Justin Gaethje came out on Twitter to blast the commentary on an ongoing match at UFC 259, saying, "Told you so, as did every judge. The commentary was unbelievably biased tonight." Lots of people on Twitter thought the same thing. Joe shot back, saying he's always respectful and tries his best not to have biases towards any one fighter. Another fighter that disagrees with Joe is Matt Hughes. In fact, Matt straight up says maybe the UFC needs a third commentator. I don't disagree with everything Rogan says, but there are a lot of things he says that I just laugh at. Man, that's pretty harsh. Many fans and fighters alike have expressed concerns about the commentary across the board. Since we're on the topic of color commentary, Jackson says to just turn it off. In the interview with Adam22 of No Jumper, Rampage explained that he thinks it's best to simply turn the volume all the way down. He said, "Joe can be kind of biased sometimes, you know, against like jiu-jitsu guys. He loves jiu-jitsu guys, and sometimes I watch the fight and I turn it down a little bit and then I get a different view of the fight." Rampage says that when you watch the UFC with no commentary, it seems to be a totally different fight than what you are hearing from outside the ring. If you think about it for a second, there might just be some truth to that. Quinton explained that the history of color commentary in boxing was that people listened to it on the radio, and they dictated how the fight was progressing to the listener. When they narrate like that, people listen, and it alters what they are actually watching. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is the time former UFC champ Quinton Rampage Jackson confronted Joe Rogan.